Well, good morning, powerful people. And today is Numbers Day, and welcome to the Workers by the Numbers Blogcast, presented by the Power at Work blog. I'm Seth Harris, a senior fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University. We're going to talk about the latest jobs, unemployment, and wages report that was released by our friends at the Bureau of Labor Statistics just 15 minutes ago. So we put all of our analytic abilities to work in those 15 minutes to try to figure out what these numbers mean. Joining me in analyzing these numbers, as always, are two of the very, very top labor economists in our country, and two of the best experts at explaining what these numbers mean for folks like me who don't have advanced economic degrees. First is a professor of economics in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University and the research director of the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. That's one person, and it's Alicia Modestino. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, good to be here.
And second, a researcher at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research and the inventor, the father of the labor leverage ratio, Aaron Sojourner. Good morning, Aaron.
Hey, y'all. Nice to be here. Happy Jobs Day.
Well, it is actually a happy Jobs Day. So let's get right to the headline. Numbers from BLS's May employment report. I don't like to call it the unemployment report. I like to call it the employment report, a little more positive spin. So the unemployment rate rose to 3.7% in May last month. The preceding month in April, it was 3.4%. The unemployment rate has been pretty steady between 3.4% and 3.7% for longer than a year now. So this could just be noise bouncing around. We'll talk about that. The economy created a whopping 339,000 jobs in May, much higher than expectations. That is an increase from April's jobs increase, and BLS revised this number. It's now 294,000 jobs, and in March it was 217,000 jobs. So even with significant revisions, 93,000 additional jobs in March and April, still May provided or created more jobs than those 2 months. The average increase in 2022 was 401,000 jobs per month. That was a very, very fast job creation rate. The job creation rate in 2023 has been somewhat slower. It's a little closer to 300,000, but still historically very high numbers of jobs being created every month in 2023. Average hourly earnings increased by 11 cents from April to May. That is slightly slower than the whopping 16 cent increase. Well, not 16%. That really would have been whopping, but 16 cent per hour average increase in wages that we saw in April. Workers have seen on average, have seen a 54-cent increase in their paychecks in 2023. That is a very impressive wage increase number. I know that heads are exploding over at the Federal Reserve with these numbers, but it's extremely good news for workers. If you compare it to inflation, these wage increases are roughly keeping up with inflation. The consumer price index we only have the numbers for April. We don't have the May numbers yet, but it was a 0.4% increase, about 4.9% annually. Another measure, which is called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index, was also up 0.4%, but only 4.4% annually. So these nominal wage increases that we're seeing, these wage increases at the top line that we're seeing, are being taken away by inflation, but workers are keeping up with inflation. Wages are not driving inflation, but workers aren't falling too far behind or behind at all, actually, in 2023. All right, so those are the numbers. Let's get to the analysis. Alicia, let me start with you. Are these numbers good for workers? Are they bad for workers? Or would you say they're a mixed bag?
Despite the increase in the unemployment rate, I'm going to go with they're good for workers. Lots of jobs being created. The strong wage growth for a second month in a row is always great. I think, you measure power in dollars as an economist. And so I always think if wages are going up, that's a good thing for workers. I think also, I'm looking at, the teen summer jobs market and how that's shaping up, and that's looking to be quite strong. And those are our most vulnerable frontline workers, right? They have the least experience. And, it's looking like they're able to get that first foothold into the labor market as well. Even though the unemployment rate went up, where for teenagers, we're seeing that for some groups it's going down, which is good. And then also we're seeing that for some groups they're participating more in the labor market. So I'm going to say this is still a good job market for workers. I think it's going to make the Fed's job a little bit difficult again coming up, but overall, pretty good picture.
Aaron, what do you think? Good for workers, bad for workers, or a mixed bag?
It's great. I mean, the labor market is humming along. Demand remains strong, and so we see hints of sort of more supply coming online, more people coming off the sidelines looking for work. This is close to a full employment. We're pushing the boundaries here, and like we don't know where these boundaries are, but it's we're a lot of people are working, a lot of people are getting raises, and it's people are looking for jobs or finding them. It's very strong.
Yeah, so I'll make it unanimous. It's in a month where you find out that there are 432,000 more jobs in the economy than you knew there were 20 minutes ago. It's very hard to say that things are going poorly for workers. I think things are going very, very well for workers. I agree with Alicia that the measure of one measure, an important measure of worker power in the labor market as a whole, is money. And the wage increases have been really robust. So what we have is job creation increasing. Actually, we've seen a little bit of an acceleration this month and over the last 3 months. We see wages doing extremely well, and yet inflation is coming down in the economy. The traditional view of the economy is that's not how it's supposed to work. You have to sacrifice workers on the altar of inflation in order to bring inflation down. That is not what's happening in this economy at all. Workers are doing great. It is a sturdy, healthy economy. We're seeing job growth across industries. We're not seeing this month, there's no report of any meaningful job loss in any sector of our economy. If you were desperately seeking some bad news in this report, and certainly the unemployment rate going up, but again, that could just be noise. We were talking before we started the recording, and that was your point, Aaron. I think it's a very important one. We've been bouncing between 3.4 and 3.7 for something like 14 months now. Is that the Black unemployment rate went back up. It was at the lowest level it had ever been at. It has gone up. The ratio between Black and white workers has gone up. That is bad news. Black workers and also Latino workers tend to be among the most vulnerable in our economy, along with teenagers, as you were saying, Alicia. But again, it's hard to know if that's just 1 month where we sort of are getting a little noise in the report, or if that is evidence of a trend. The trend had been extremely good for Black workers. So I'm inclined to make it unanimous. And that is that, it's going to be hard to get a better report than this deep into a recovery. If you had asked, I think if you had asked a panel of economists at the end of the COVID recession, this deep into the recovery, would we see this kind of job growth? Every one of them would have said no. And so it's this is a really robust economy. Okay, Aaron, let me start the next question with you. We always want to go below the headline numbers and try to find the nuggets, or the 1 or 2 or 3 little pieces of information that maybe everybody isn't going to focus on, but tell us something very important about this report and what's going on for workers in the economy. So what is your statistic or statistics of the day?
Well, I want to unpack that rise in the unemployment rate a little bit and say, if you dig down, there's a supplemental table on labor force flows that will tell you that actually part of the reason it's gone up is that more people came off the bench outside the labor force, and started searching for a job in May than in prior months. And, it's not, there's rounding stuff at the headline numbers that might obscure it a little bit. But, you can see that it does look like maybe job finding is slowing down a little bit. But the good news of people coming off the sidelines and searching for work means expanding supply, expanding output in the economy, expanding earnings without so much price pressure. If you can expand supply and make sure people are finding a new way to contribute in the economy, better options. That's good news. And again, so I think that's I think it'll bear out over time. Unemployment can go up for a bad reason. Job seekers can't find jobs. It can also go up for a good reason. People coming off the sideline and starting to search. And it seems like we have a little bit of both, maybe. But again, this is just, also we have Black employment rates are above pre-pandemic levels for men and for women. And so, this 1 month, maybe the news isn't, the estimate isn't so great, but if you look kind of at the levels where we're at compared to where we were, it still looks pretty strong.
Yeah, I want to pick up on this a little bit because I think that you're making an extremely important point about the reason we love tight labor markets, right? The reason we like sustained low unemployment in the economy is that it brings people who have been left out and left behind in the past back into the productive economy. It gets them back to work. It opens up jobs to them. It forces employers, as Elise Gould said last month, to stop discriminating, to stop making bad decisions, and to look more broadly for workers and to bring some of those workers who have been out of the labor market back in. Justice involved individuals, workers with disabilities, workers of color, folks who are left out and left behind. When you have very tight labor markets over an extended period of time, this is what you see. People start coming back. And so the prosperity in the economy is shared much, much, much more broadly, which is what we're trying to accomplish. It's the centerpiece of President Biden's economic agenda. Drive growth by increasing supply, not by suppressing demand. And so that is evidence that it's working in this strategy. So I really like that statistic of the day a good bit. Alicia, I know you're looking at a very particular group, a very important group in our labor market. Go ahead, give us your statistic or statistics of the day.
Yeah, my statistic of the day is looking at teenagers, right? So looking 16 to 19-year-olds. And, speaking of who can you draw into the labor market, these are the least experienced workers in our labor market. Having a summer job is one way for them to get a foothold in the door, to be able to gain some experience, to either get to the next job or to start thinking about a career or start getting exposed to, adult mentors who can help them further down the road. So even though the unemployment rate for teenagers 16 to 19 went up, that means that they're looking for jobs. So it went up overall from 9.2% to 10.3% as they're coming into the labor market looking for those summer jobs. And some of them are also landing those summer jobs. So this is one place where the Black unemployment rate for teenagers actually went down from April to May, from 12.9% to 11.7%. It also went down for Hispanic teenage workers from 11.4% to 10.1%. And so that's telling me that some of these teenagers who are going out into the job market looking for their first job, they're able to find it. And some of that has to do with some of the summer youth employment programs that are running in the larger cities. Right now, that is exactly what's happening is young people are getting selected for those jobs. They're getting put on payrolls. And that's what those programs are supposed to do. They're supposed to level the playing field across different groups by race and socioeconomic status. And it looks like that's what's happening now. I'll also just say, in general, the outlook for teenagers is, again, very good this summer, where we're seeing, an employment to population ratio even though it's bumping up and down a little bit as more kids are coming into the labor market, we're really at, 20-year lows or so, as we really have to go back before the Great Recession to see an employment to population ratio that's as high as it is even right now, as we're swinging into just the beginning of the summer months. And so I think, again, it's going to be a strong, good job market for teenagers. And in particular, the wage increases are really exciting too, because we're seeing wages are increasing right at the bottom of the distribution. We're seeing, lots of retailers who have increased wages, restaurants, ice cream shops, you name it, across the board. And I think that's a really telling point in terms of the strength of the economy and how it's good for newer workers who are coming in, those who are jumping back in off the sidelines, the more vulnerable workers that we were talking about. I know I was interviewing a childcare employer yesterday who said that they were able to give wage increases to their workers who were so emotional and were overcome, literally tears of joy, but because they could quit their second job. Okay, that's where we are in this recovery, where people, low wage workers, can quit their second job because their first job is starting to pay a living wage. And I think that's really exciting.
It's very exciting. So I want to ask you two questions and take whichever one you want to answer, or you can answer them both. One is, you mentioned the role of government funding in some of the summer jobs programs, and for a long time there has been federal funding, but at a fairly low level. So is it possible to pull apart how much of this is driven by government funding and how much of this is a consequence of the phenomenon that we are seeing in the labor market, which is that adult workers are quitting retail jobs, leisure and hospitality jobs, and moving into higher quality jobs, and those employers really desperately searching for workers. And so, as we were just talking about, expanding their search to include more teens in that search. Actually, I won't ask the second question. Let me just focus on that question.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. For the last 2 summers, we've heard it directly from employers in anecdotes, as well as seeing it in the data, that there's a big movement where adult workers are finally able to take a job that pays a higher wage, move up in the labor market, and they're freeing up what were traditionally teenage jobs, right? And so it was very exciting that during the pandemic, when we finally moved into the recovery phase and we opened everything up, I remember distinctly here right before Memorial Day weekend, Governor Baker said, "Oh, guess what? We're going to open everything at full capacity." And the employers freaked out. The restaurants, the retailers, the ice cream shops on the Cape all said, "Oh my God, how are we going to fill these jobs?" They rediscovered teenagers. That's how they filled those jobs that summer, and that's how they keep doing it. So there's a really strong pressure that's coming just from labor demand in general. Where I think the government subsidy comes in is really for those particular groups in the labor market that are usually left behind. So when we're talking about those cushy summer jobs on the Cape, that largely goes to white middle class kids who can work super part-time hours and their families on the Cape anyway. When we're looking to employ Black and brown youth, that's really in the neighborhoods of color in Boston. And those youth are largely getting employed through the Summer Youth Employment Program. And so that's where those programs are filling a gap, but absolutely that the strong demand is finally reaching deeper and re-engaging youth, just like it has other vulnerable populations.
So I want to ask you a second question. I want to get Aaron in on this as well, because he's done work in this area too. There are lifelong consequences for young workers entering a labor market and not being able to find a job and having long periods of unemployment at the beginning or sort of intermittent employment as well. And what you're describing is a circumstance where teen workers are in demand, they're able to find jobs, they're finding good quality jobs, they're getting good quality experience. Talk a little bit, both of you, let me start with you, Alicia, and then Aaron, I'm eager to get you to jump in on this. What does it mean for those workers' lifetime, not just earnings, but lifetime job prospects, that they're entering a labor market that's as tight and as job rich as the labor market that we have right now?
Yeah, I can tell you, we have really rigorous evidence from having studied the summer youth employment programs that show that there's all kinds of benefits for young people, not just during the summer, being more able to get a job, to get a higher wage, to be able to help pay family bills, but also into the future. So for example, some of the research that we've done on the Boston Summer Youth Employment Program shows that young people are more likely to graduate from high school 4 years later. Why is that? Because we find through surveys and other data that we collect that young people gain great work habits on the job. They learn how to show up on time. They learn how to work in a team. They learn a bunch of social and emotional skills. And that shows up in a higher attendance rate the year after participating in the program, the year after having a job. It shows up in failing fewer courses. And then it's not rocket science. If you show up on time and you don't fail, you graduate from high school. We've also shown that having a private sector job, which is another part of the program that really caters to having positions in the private sector, like, in the hospitals, with some of our life sciences companies here in Massachusetts, that increases the likelihood of taking the SAT and enrolling in a 4-year college, increasing those academic aspirations, having mentors, right, that can show you different career paths. So these are long sustaining kinds of trajectories that young people can get put on. And then even, we also find direct employment effects. So in the year and a half or 2 years after finishing the program, young people are also more likely to get a job outside of the program and earn higher wages. And in particular, for opportunity youth of color. So youth age 20 to 24 who haven't been engaged in the labor market are much more likely to be able to find employment after having participated in the program because they have an employer who's going to vouch for them and provide a recommendation. So these can have really long sustaining effects.
Great. Aaron, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. If you look at the employment rates by age group and by narrow age group and how they've changed compared to 4 years ago. So last 3 months versus same 3 months 4 years ago. And I want to remind you, like 4 years ago, the economy wasn't bad. That was pre-pandemic, 2019. Like everybody thought that was full employment. A lot of people did. And like it was a strong labor market. Right now, young people, teenagers, are 3 percentage points higher employment rates than even just right before the pandemic. So they really are, there are just more opportunities out there and they're taking advantage of them. And part of the reason is that they have just, young Americans have experienced tremendously fast wage growth, like unprecedentedly fast wage growth over the last 2 years. So, over the last year for workers 16 to 24, the typical wage growth is something like over 11% wage growth in a year. And, if you go back to like the late 90s, wage growth was never higher than 9%. So, and it's come down. It was up at 13%. So young people have just been experiencing, they always experience faster wage growth because they're earlier in their career than older workers do. But in the last few years, it's been unprecedentedly fast wage growth for young people. And it really does there's a lot of great economic research from a lot of different methods that shows entering the labor market into a strong full employment labor market really has career-long, lifelong consequences. And the generation that graduated into the Great Recession, that scarred their careers. And the generation that's graduating into this labor market, like they're going to have a leg up. And you can see it in their earnings, you can see it in their employment rate. You can actually see it in their, and as Professor Modestino is mentioning, in their skills. Like people have measured skills and cognitive skills, even like giving them tests like IQ tests, and like because you learn on the job and you learn through engagement, and you can see this showing up in people years later, and it makes a difference. So.
Yeah, thank you both for that very important reminder that for those folks who are cheerleading for unemployment to go up as a way of slowing the economy down, there is a very, very real cost to driving up interest rates and putting workers out of work, because those teen workers, as Alicia said early on in this blogcast, those teen workers are right at the front lines. They are the vulnerable workers who are going to lose their jobs, along with Black and brown workers and high school educated and less white workers. It's going to be damaging to them, not merely in the short term, but in the long term. And it's just a very important public policy outcome that we have to keep in mind. Unemployment has long-lasting, devastating consequences to workers' lives, beginning at the age, as Alicia was saying, of 16 to 18, but also lasting for much longer periods of time. We have to keep that in mind. Okay, let me do my statistic of the day, and I'll do it very quickly because I want to get to your takes on worker power. As anybody who's watched this blogcast more than once knows, I always keep a close eye on part-time and voluntary workers. That number went down another 200,000 this in May. That's a very powerful indication, along with the numbers that Aaron pointed to, talking about what's happening with those who are out of the labor force now moving into the labor force, and also an increase in the number of workers who are out of the labor force but say they want a job. That is a very, very good sign. Workers are shifting one seat to the left. Part-time workers are getting full-time jobs. Workers who are out of the labor force and didn't want to work now do want to work. Workers are moving out of the labor force into the labor force. That is extremely good news. People are finding jobs. They are being successful, and that's because the labor market is as strong as it is right now. So we should try to sustain that. Just as a public policy matter, so many fantastic things are happening that we've talked about in this blogcast. Keeping the labor market as tight as it is a critically important public policy outcome from my perspective. Okay, let's turn to worker power, the obsessive focus of the Power at Work blog. Alicia, let me come back to you. What does this report say about worker power?
Yeah, I'm glad that we have this obsessive focus. I really do think it comes down to looking at wages and combined with the strong job growth. And the reason why I think those two things are really important is because when it becomes more difficult for employers to find workers, when they have to, broaden their search, they employ more of the folks that we were talking about. But then when it's coupled now with a labor market that's so tight that wages are going up like this, those workers can actually negotiate, right? They can get better schedules that fit with their childcare constraints. They can make sure that they get better benefits. And by benefits, I don't mean just healthcare that barely covers you. I mean, benefits that are, quite generous. And then also, maybe even go to employee wellness. Like I'm talking to a lot of childcare providers right now, and finding they're doing things like closing the week between Christmas and New Year's, right? Giving that time back to their workers with their families has a tremendous effect on their workers' well-being. And so I think once we get to this point in the cycle where we're seeing strong wage growth, which is meaning that employers are going to have to pay more, right, to be able to fill those positions, then along with the just tremendous number of jobs that we're seeing last month and this month, I think that means that workers are able to ask for the things that they want. And I think we're in a good moment. I'm glad that the debt ceiling agreement passed, because that could have potentially disrailed or wobbled what we're seeing right now. So I think that, we can continue to build on this, but it's great leverage. And so I'm excited to hear from Aaron about the new measure and where he thinks we are.
Yeah, people are on the edge of their seats, desperate to know what the latest
Labor
leverage
ratio.
There are people who are protesting outside my house that I was taking too long to get to the labor leverage ratio. Aaron, you can talk about the labor leverage. Can I just say we need a new brand? We need a new moniker for that. Make it a little sexier. We'll have to work. We'll put our marketing department here at the Power at Work blog to work on that. Tell us what you think is happening with worker power in the economy.
Yeah, so I'll mention this just because you brought it up. But so the labor leverage ratio is the ratio of it's how many quits there are in the economy over how many firings there are in the economy. So how many quits per firing, how many employees are deciding I can take this job and shove it versus how many employers are saying, I don't want you here. Like I got a better option than you. So it's, optimism and worker power versus, employer strength and leverage against their employees. And so when that thing goes up, it means workers have more bargaining power relative to their bosses. And it's been falling for it's been very high, during the height of the wage shortage, labor shortage, it was very high. There were a lot of quits, not a lot of layoffs, not a lot of firings. It's come down since the Federal Reserve Board started raising interest rates to try to slow the economy, try to cool inflation, consequently, cooling demand for the labor. It's fallen by about 2/3 of the way back to pre-pandemic levels. It ticked up this month, but it's basically been on a trend down, and it's actually getting close to sort of pre-pandemic level. So, I think we're seeing moderation of worker bargaining power. We're seeing moderation of demand in the labor market. We're seeing it come down. The great news is, again, I totally agree, like we averted an economic cataclysm that would have just been a total own goal, like us, self-harm to like just blow up our economy for no good reason. We avoided that. That's good. The other big risk we face is the Fed over tightens and steers the economy into the ditch. They don't want to do that, and they haven't done it. But I hope they continue not to do it. Things are going really well, it looks like to me. And hopefully we can stay on that smooth path to a soft landing.
I'll make it unanimous. I think that individual worker power continues to be quite strong in the labor market. The wage increase number is an indication of that. The labor leverage ratio is telling us that. Quits tick down a little bit. That's telling us that it's still strong, but down a little bit. But I always come back to the point that that individual workers have power as long as labor markets are tight. When labor markets loosen up, they need a union. They can't succeed without having a union. They're not going to continue to see steady wage increases and better working conditions unless they get a union. And how we are doing with respect to union organizing in our country and collective bargaining is still very much up in the air. I view 2023 as the year of collective bargaining. There are some big contracts that need to get settled. We need to see how they're going to come out. UPS, the UAW, and the big three, the West Coast ports, Starbucks and Amazon, new first contracts. We need to see how those are going to come out. That's where worker power gets solidified in concrete. When a union is in place, that's how we know that it's going to be fully successful. So I'm going to, with that sort of on-brand comment on worker power, I'm going to bring the conversation to a close right there. Let me thank today's guests, Alicia Modestino and Aaron Sojourner, again, for their outstanding expert insight and their continued excellent work in this space. I also want to thank Lexi Anderson, our producer, our technical producer, our social media guru. Before you leave the blog, please subscribe to the blog. Just click on subscribe, give us your email address. There's lots of terrific material here right now on the blog. In addition to a number of posts that I've written, there's a blogcast and a podcast of my conversation with longtime labor lawyer Dan Ratner, who tells the shocking and compelling story of the Battle of Bronxville. Dan and I also analyzed some of the cases that are pending, including the Glacier Northwestern case, which was just decided yesterday by the United States Supreme Court. I suspect we'll have more to say about that soon. And finally, if you subscribe to the Power at Work blog, we'll send you the weekly download, which is a collection of about 24 articles and studies and research and press releases and other materials from all around the web that we think you need to have that relate to workers and unions and worker power. I just reviewed this week's weekly download yesterday. Lots of terrific stuff in there, stuff that you're not going to ordinarily see unless you're really looking for it, like a very important press release from the National Labor Relations Board. You'll see that in the weekly download. So you can get that in your inbox by subscribing. You can also check it out on the Power at Work blog. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you back here on the Power at Work blog really soon. Thanks.